Well, it's jack-o'-lantern time. So I start with a simple oval shape. I add a little bit of texture to it and kind of where I want to go with the end drawing. And then I start adding a little bit of color and depth. And I'm looking for the deeper spots and the highlight spots first. So I try to get these crevices where you would see the pumpkin sections coming together to be developed. I add a flood color to it, and since I'm working in layers, I can reduce the opacity of that back layer and work on some of the other details. Like I spent a little bit of time on the stem so that it's got a little bit more, but it feels like it was twisted and turned, and it actually has a little bit of green in it. So I kind of want to make it feel like it's a living organism. But as I keep moving along, I start looking for detail in the rest of the pumpkin. I go around and start adding in the texture. And instead of just straight lines, you'll notice that I've got like dotted lines and squiggly lines because that makes it feel like it's texture. It's not one solid move. If you feel a pumpkin, it's a rough surface, but it does have some sheen to it, so you have some reflection in the top of it. And so then you got to add the color inside there and the depth of the mouth, like where you carved it out of the pumpkin. So I kind of do the same thing with the eyes and the nose, and I put a little bit of depth in there so that eventually I can come back and add a little more intensity to it. And again, I start adding more and more detail as I go along. I want to make sure the edges are where they feel they should be, and there is a crisp difference between the brightness of the light inside the pumpkin and the darkness outside the pumpkin. And as I start moving along, I do want to feel like that pumpkin pops a little bit more off the background. So I want to add more texture to the pumpkin itself. So I'm going to actually start going in each one of those crevices and adding a little bit of shading going up the side. And the detail you'll start to see slowly come up. And I add darker and darker images so that I can kind of make sure that I got a definite pop between the pumpkin itself in the background. And then I broaden my brush and loosen its opacity, and I put some little bit of shading in there so it makes it feel like this thing's actually deep. I brighten up the orange so it feels like that pumpkin orange, and then I go and look at the highlights on there, and I start putting in a little opaque, kind of a transparent brush on top of here to give a little bit more texture to the pumpkin. And I think about the eyes and the mouth and the nose. I've got to have a shadow under it, so that kind of gives it a feel that it's really sitting there. So on the eyes and the mouth, I do want to try to put that light in there so that it feels like it's got some sort of glow to it. So I actually start adding a little bit of depth to the eyes, and then I'm going to come back in and I'm going to change the differences. If you notice, right around the rim of the mouth and then inside there, and then I want to throw that glow to it. So I add a little bit more glow, and then I draw it in as if it's very bright, and then I change that opacity. You'll notice, see how I make it very harsh, and I get the whites on top of the yellows, and then I drop back the opacity so you can barely see it. Throw a background in, just sort of start exploring with the background and see what I want to do. Change it to where it feels like it's just sitting there for the pumpkin and not over dominating, and it feels a little heavy, so I'm going to take the background and play with it a little bit, make the pumpkin a little bit more intense. So I'm darkening down the colors to try to bring it back to the background level. And the pumpkin is starting to feel like it is a pretty dark pumpkin. And the setting where it is going to be dark. But I do know that if I can just add that extra feel to the pumpkin, like it's got that light reflecting off the top of it, you'll feel that there's enough there to say, okay, this feels almost like it is a solid pumpkin. And I realized that I have to kind of lighten up the edges a little bit. So I actually go through, and it's hard to see in this, but I'm actually taking the lines out around the cuts in the eyes and the mouth. And I start to kind of eliminate those little by little, just so that I know that I have a hard edge there. There it goes, and now you can see that it's just cut into the pumpkin, and I want to show a little bit more of that mouth and the eyes, so I'm adding that extra level to the back cut ends on it, and I'm putting little tiny texture pieces in where the cuts meet the different parts of the pumpkin. And again, this is pretty much a hard sketch, and it's a pretty rapid sketch. I'm not really taking a lot of time to make it look super realistic, but this is enough to give you the idea of what it is. Mouth and eyes get a little bit deeper, and I think, okay, now I got to cut, now I got to feel, and I'm going to lighten the background, and I think that's where we'll be. So that is what the pumpkin would look like when you get done.